Welcome to Finding Faith, the space we come to share stories of encounter, ask questions, and share in the lived experience of others. As you listen to the stories of our interview guests, I ask that you consider the courage it takes to stand before your peers and share your experience of faith for the benefit of another. My name is Jessie Bennett, and this is the 18th episode of Finding Faith. So today we have with us Matt Knight. Matt, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am a youth minister in Owensboro, Kentucky. I've been doing youth ministry for 5 years at St. Pius X. Got a beautiful wife and a very independent, strong-willed daughter in Caroline, and then we have a little one on the way. It's coming in February, so growing young little family.
Thank you so much, Matt. And Matt is going to share his story with us of how he came to an encounter with Jesus through recognizing that he was living two-faced, that he was living a double life. So, Matt, if you don't mind, go ahead and share your story with us.
My story is a journey, that's for sure. And reflecting back on it, I grew up in a military household up until I was 4 years old. And we moved around quite a bit. I never really got settled down in any particular place. I was born in Wichita, Kansas. After 2 weeks of being born, my dad got shipped to South Korea for a year. So then we moved to Henderson, Kentucky for the first time. And then my dad came back, and then we went to Montana. And then from Montana, moved back to Henderson, Kentucky, all before I was 4 years old. And then when we finally settled in Henderson, Kentucky, we never got settled in on a house until I was in second grade. We lived with my grandparents, which my grandma played a heavy role in my faith journey. But we lived there while my dad went to school. And then when my dad graduated, shortly after that, we went and bought a house just right down the road within 3 blocks of my grandparents' house. My grandma played a huge role in my story. My whole life has kind of been a constant moving of many parts, which later on in my life found out that it could be described as a chameleon and being able to fit in really any sort of circumstance. I grew up in a split faith household. My dad was raised Southern Baptist, and my family was raised my mom's family was raised Catholic. So my mom and my grandma made sure that my faith life was always centered around the Catholic Church. But because of my dad's strong Southern Baptist background and his family, it was kind of all over the place. I always had all these questions in regards to my Catholic faith because I had my other side of the family who was also Baptist, very, very strong Southern Baptist. My dad has two uncles who are Baptist preachers, and it just kind of was a part of any kind of family gathering when we went to my dad's house. I grew up in a way kind of where that two-faced, not really two-faced, but being able to fit in on both sides because my mom's side of the family weren't upper middle class, but we never really struggled to buy anything that we wanted. As far as my dad's side of the family, though, when we would get together with them, they were very, very, very faith-filled. And a lot of that, I feel like, has to do with the fact that they didn't have all these really cool gadgets that we had growing up on when I was with my mom's side of the family, whether it was video game systems or fancy laptops or computer gear. So part of that reason was my dad grew up in a family that were tenant farmers. And my dad kind of later on in life told me that he did everything that he did so that way me and my sister didn't have the same struggles that he had growing up as far as finances and everything like that goes. So moving on into my life, I was able to adapt in whatever situation that I was put in. Whether it was with sports, I played baseball, basketball, and soccer all through growing up. Whether it was being in band when I got into middle school, I was able to fit into that crowd. Later on in high school, my mom really pushed me to do orchestra. So I was able to fit in with the orchestra crowd, which is a completely different crowd than those who are in band. And I had a close friend growing up, but everyone else was just kind of acquaintances, and I could go in and out of whatever group that I was wanting to hang out with for that day. Later on in life, it ended up giving me trouble because when you look back on your life and you look at all your friends, there's really only one that had been there through everything. And even when we were younger, when I asked him to be my best man, everyone was like, are you sure about that? Like, you guys are completely different people. We were kind of like a yin yang type friendship. I would make him get out of his books. He would make sure that I would go back into books and study as far as school goes. So all throughout my life, I was in and out of friends groups, constantly hanging out with different people. And it really played a role about my freshman year of high school is when my faith really started turning slowly but surely. My freshman year of high school, I went on a retreat, and my youth minister gave a talk about being two-faced and how when you say you're a Christian, when you say you're following Christ, and then your actions are completely different, that people can see that. And so that was the first time I really started questioning, really, okay, what is this faith life that is being talked about? I went through CCD my entire life. Although I went to public school, Catholic was always a part of me, but not really a part of me. The only, as far as Catholic thing that would happen is, we'd eat fish on Friday, and one time a year I was not allowed to have chicken rings on Wednesday, even though we had chicken rings every single Wednesday from kindergarten all the way through senior year of high school. That was as far as my Catholic faith really stood, in that. Those, when I played sports, when I played baseball, they knew I was Catholic because our CCD class was on Wednesday for confirmation. And so I would have to leave practice early. But outside of that, that was really my only Catholic identity. But my grandma always questioned me to go further with that. I almost didn't get confirmed that 8th grade year because I didn't really know what it meant to be Catholic. I didn't know what all was going on. This was just a thing that everyone did. I had a Jewish friend that had a bar mitzvah, so it was similar to that. As an 8th grader, that's how Matt and I viewed it. So my grandma, though, would always sit down with me, and she would always want to know why I struggled being Catholic. And part of the reason why I struggled being Catholic is because I had all these questions because of my two faith background. Everyone and my dad's side of the family, who were Southern Baptists, you could just tell that they were completely in love with Christ, and it was such a foreign concept. But you look at my mom's side of the family, who were all Catholic, faith wasn't really being alive outside of CCD class and my grandma. You didn't really see people going to Mass on holy days. We didn't really do that unless it was a holy day of obligation. So much so that the only reason why my whole family was at Mass on Sunday was because my grandma made it happen. She forced us to go to Mass with her as a family. So that was my experience with the Catholic faith. When I went on this retreat my freshman year, and the youth minister chose to describe this in the most dramatic way possible by shaving off half of his beard and leaving the other half of his beard on, just that I can remember resonating with that whole aspect of, it's that apparent. If I say that I'm Catholic and I'm not doing these things, it's that obvious that I'm not really living my faith. But that was the only time I thought of that. Once the retreat was over, I was back to going in and out of friendship groups, being at CCD on Sunday or at youth group, and then living one life in faith at the church, and then living another life at school. In church, I was the not model, but, I helped lead Sunday school classes with the younger kids. I was there on Sunday mornings. We were at youth group every weekend because my mom made me. So, and then when you would see me at school, it'd be completely different because of whatever friends group I was in that day or decided to hang out with that day. That kind of dictated my personality for that time frame. Didn't give much thought about it my sophomore year at all. And then my junior year, it is when my faith, that was like my aha moment. Faith was always a part of my life. It wasn't something that I always chose. But my junior year is when that typical high school crisis, my entire world's falling apart. I don't know what to do. And there were some legitimate things that were really falling apart. And then there were some stupid things, like my girlfriend for 2 years broke up with me. And so, oh my gosh, woe is me. I don't know what I'm going to do. But then there were more serious things that I was really questioning. My grandma got really, really sick, and it affected me because my grandma not only was the strong Catholic in my family, but she always knew what was going on with me without me ever saying anything. And my grandma was one of those people that she found out pretty early on how my interest in sports was. And so what I did find out later on after my grandma did pass away was that she would stand up when she knew I was coming over. She would watch Sports Center. So that way she knew what was going on in the sports world. So when I would come into her room, where she watched TV, she would have an actual conversation with me about sports. And so she was just one of those people. And so when my grandma got sick, I questioned a lot of things in my life. And it was really the first time that I looked at God and was like, where are you? What in the world is going on? How could you let someone who is such a focal point of our family get so sick? And now you can kind of see everything crumbling apart. And so throughout this time, I was at the hospital a lot. She was in and out of ICU. She was on and off ventilators, on and off oxygen. It was a really, really long time frame. And when it was finally time to pull the plug on my grandma, my parents were like, go to Mass. We'll wait till you get out of Mass to come in, and we'll pull the plug when we have everyone here. And during that time, they ended up pulling the plug. And so I wasn't there with my grandma when she did eventually pass. And that really, really affected me. That made me so mad at my family. It made me mad at the world. It made me really mad at God. Here I am going to Mass to honor my grandmother, and this is what's going to end up happening. And so I remember going into a really dark time frame. My girlfriend, who had just broke up with me, creeped back into my life because, oh my gosh, we feel sorry for him. Like, this was a huge person in his life. So there's a lot of mixed emotions with that. And then all of a sudden it was just over again. And so I remember sitting in my room, and music has always been a way in which I'm able to show emotion, because that's really something that I struggle with. The only emotion that I ever really show is anger and frustration. And so that's kind of how I feel other emotions, is by listening to music. And so I remember being in my room, and for the first time, Jesus was like actually present in my prayer life. I had my iPod on shuffle. And of course, this was the heart of the angry emo alternative music. And so all these things are going on. So I was feeling all these emotions. And then with my iPod on shuffle, the most ridiculous song by Sanctus Real came on. That it's one of those songs that I'd listened to forever. And I liked the lyrics because, of course, I want to leave a legacy. But the lyrics are, you want to leave a legacy to be remembered more than just a memory that fades away. And so, because we only have one life. And I remember it hitting me like a ton of bricks. I just was completely in tears. And the reason for is because it's one of those moments that I didn't really feel I really felt my grandma as a part of it. She was so strong in her faith. And all I could remember about my grandma during this moment was all of her faith things. I remember the conversations throughout confirmation of all of my questions. I have all these questions about my faith. No one's answering my questions. I can't find the right answer. I don't like what I like about the answer. And my grandma would just kind of look at me and say, that is faith. That is what faith is. Faith is asking questions and then seeking the understanding. And it's okay not to agree with everything that the church offers, as long as we have God in it and we're trying to understand what it is God tells us through the truth of the Catholic Church. And I remember the most stupidest things of, my butt would hit the pew during the Eucharistic prayer, and shortly after your butt hits the pew, you get slapped upside the head. And she looks at you and then points to Jesus on the crucifix and says, "Do you think he ever wanted to rest?" And we only did it once, but I remember my grandma gathering us at midnight on Christmas Eve with a birthday cake and singing "Happy Birthday to Jesus." And, I had all these thoughts, and that was all those are still the memories that I remember of my grandmother. I don't remember the bad. I don't know if it's just a coping mechanism or what. I'm sure your husband would be able to break that down into million pieces, but all I can remember of my grandma is her faith and just the genuine love that came from that faith. And then it just sent me through a rabbit hole. And then it started having me think of other people in my life. And of course, my youth minister, he played a phenomenal role in my life in high school. And that's all I could remember is, the toothpaste talk in this time in my room. And all I could remember is all of the different praise and worship things that we would do at youth group and all the retreat sessions and this longing for more. And all I could think about was Christ coming out of my youth minister. And then I would think of my dad's family and what makes my dad's family different than my mom's family. And it's that love that they have of Christ. And so in my room that day, I can remember saying, enough is enough. I'm done living this two-faced life. I'm done being at church on Sunday and then turning around and being something completely different on Monday. It was like, God, I don't know if you're there. I don't know what it is, what this relationship could be, but I know I want what they have. And so give me what they have. Give me that genuine love. Give me that genuine affection. Give me that genuine joy that these people show. And I can remember Jesus looking there and is like, okay, if you want to leave that legacy, then you're going to have to leave some people behind. And that was really hard for me. And I don't think I truly understood what that meant until college. But after that time in my room, I kind of decided enough is enough. And so, I started dropping friends from school. I started stop hanging out with certain people. Granted, relationships are confusing. And so some people still snuck into my life throughout high school, and then others were easier to let go. And I thought I was doing really, really well with it. I surrounded myself with those at youth group, really forced myself to surround myself with those who are at youth group that go to my school. And then my senior year, I got in trouble. I really annoyed my band director, and it was always intentionally. And if somehow, some way he ends up listening to this, I apologize. But I remember it was my very last day of senior year, and we're doing a pep rally, and you could just tell that this band director had a switch hit and said, "I'm finally done with you." And so he kicked me out. And so I go to the Sam's office and I'm like, "Mr. Corsi, what am I going to do? It's my last day." And he looks at me and says, "Matt, what are we going to do? Like, it's your last day. You're graduating tomorrow. Like, what's going to end up happening?" And he's like, "Just go back to the pep rally." And I just remember, "Mr. Corsi, this isn't a good idea. Like, I've never seen him this mad at me. Like, I've seen him mad, but like, he's mad." And so he's like, "Well, there's nothing we can do. So go back to the pep rally." And I go back and I'm walking up the steps, and I can just remember, like, this is not going to be good. This is not going to be good. Like, there's 5 minutes left in school, and I think this teacher might actually kill me. Like, this is not going to be good. And I'm walking up the steps, and the assistant band director walks down and says, no, you're not going back." And so we go back to the band room. We're sitting in the office, and my assistant band director is Catholic, and I would see him at Mass. And I can remember him looking at me and saying, "I don't get you. You make us want to murder you in class, and yet I'm put into check because here you are at a holy day without your family." And so I just don't understand it. Like, is this who you want to be? Is this who you want us to remember you as? Like, this is your one shot to make a lasting impression at Henderson County High in the band program, and this is what you want your lasting impression to be. And again, I can just remember like hitting like a ton of bricks. And it's like, oh man, like these people genuinely care. Like these people actually want to see me do well. And I haven't been doing that. And so yet again, it was another encounter with Jesus of you can't keep living these two lives. Like you have to choose. And I remember right after that, choosing the right thing. And then freshman year of college hits and I'm away from all of my family and yet again, going down bad decisions after bad decisions. But I also have good decisions because I'm a part of crew. So like, hey, I'm still hanging out with Christians. But then again, here I am with this. It wasn't until I experienced the Newman Center at Western that it finally hit that you can't be living these two lives. And it just, in prayer in the chapel at the Newman Center, I can remember God saying, these people have met you once and they know your name. You have been going to crew for 7 months and none of those people know your name. Like, how much more can I show you that this is the path that you need to choose? That you've got to leave everything else behind and follow me and be a part and have me be a part of your life. And it's always funny because my initial faith conversion was that junior year in my room. But every single moment after that is a constant, like, how many more times do I have to show you that you made the right decision? And so now I can say that those two lives are finally behind me. But, you know, it's still a constant thing. Like, you know, I see my family go in and out of relationships and being able to mold and bend. And I can feel myself being drawn back to being able to be that chameleon and sit in whatever room I can and be able to find some sense of relationship with whoever's in there based off of where they're at. Except now I'm able to do it from a sense of how can I get them to where I'm at? And so how can I show them that the love of Christ that I've accepted, that I've allowed into my life, how can I help them see that same love and realize that that's who I am, not because of what my interests are, not because of what I do for a living, or not because of, Matt, you're just really good at making friends, but you're able to do all of this because I'm a part of your life, because that's the joy that is coming off of you. So I always laugh looking back at it because it's been a constant journey. But every time I've had that moment with Christ, it's you have to leave that old past behind you and you have to start choosing this, because people can see it. People are obviously able to see whether you're in love with me or you're running away from me. And so what is it going to be?
Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing your story with us. I think one of the things that was coming to my mind throughout this was it seems like you took this obstacle in your life, this duality or two-facedness, this ability to like become a chameleon. It seemed like it was an obstacle at first, but you turned it into almost like a blessing, that you can still be a chameleon of sorts, to make friends with anybody, fit in any social situation or social circle. But now instead of becoming them, you're able to, you know who you are. And so
Yes.
You don't lose yourself in the process of meeting them where they're at. So it's, I don't know, that just kept coming up in my mind, that like this obstacle, that what started out as an obstacle has now become kind of like a blessing for you.
Yeah. And it's taken a long journey with that. I went to counseling and spiritual direction all throughout college. And that was the constant thing that came back was, who am I? Like, how can I be comfortable with who I am? Because as silly as it may be, I really struggled, because even though we're in Kentucky, there's a lot of people that love sports, but I hate college sports. Like, I hate amateur sports so much. Like, I don't want to watch a game where there's 70 turnovers. Like, I want to watch a game where, you know, everyone on that court can make a shot. And I always struggled with that, because everyone in Kentucky who's really into sports is into collegiate sports, because we don't have professional sports. And so that was a big thing in counseling. That was kind of like a breaking point to me of, this is who I am, be comfortable with it. Because the counselor that I had looked at me and said, Matt, I'm from Detroit. Like, if you were living in any other state other than Kentucky, like, you wouldn't be struggling with this. Why is this such a hurdle? And so in college, I met other people who were super interested into professional sports and had that same strong feeling of collegiate sports that I had. And it was like, okay, like, I'm not different. Like, I'm not some weirdo that just fell in love with professional baseball and professional basketball and professional football. Like, this is normal. Like, why did I have this? Why did I struggle with this? And when I was able to figure that out in my life, then I was able to then put everything else back together and put all the pieces back together of, okay, this is who I am. And these are gifts. These are blessings. This gift of being able to make friends with whoever, how can I use it in order to bring people to Christ? And so, like, once I was able to figure that out, I was able to not step back into the old ways of, being in toxic relationships because they're fun. But I know it's weird, but like, being able to be around them and also hopefully being able to draw them into what I fell in love with as well.
All too often, I feel like when we have these obstacles in our lives, these pieces of us that we're trying to overcome, we think that the only way to overcome it is to cut it out of our lives completely and get rid of it. But that usually makes it worse. It's what I've discovered in my own life. It's what any counselor will tell you, is that it's going to get worse unless you learn to integrate it, to help incorporate it into your personality, which is exactly what you did. My husband's probably turning over in his chair right now, me talking about psychology, but you know what I mean? Yeah. When we begin to integrate that into our personality, that's when it becomes better. Mm-hmm. We learn how to incorporate it. We learn how to turn that obstacle into a blessing, or that curse into a gift. So I just have a couple of questions for you, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like your dad was incredibly strong in his faith and your mom seemed kind of lukewarm in hers. So I'm curious how you and your sister ended up Catholic and not Baptist.
I can't speak for my sister, but I can speak from my perspective. And my dad didn't convert to Catholicism till I was in 7th grade. Oh,
so he did end up...
He did convert.
Okay.
Yes, he is converted into Catholicism, and he's actually going to class to be a deacon right now. So how the tables have turned. But I remember asking my dad, during this time, we would go to church with my dad's family, and he would be active, he'd be alive. You could tell that there's a difference. And then he would go to church with us, and he would either leave at communion to go get the table at Kelsey G's, where we would eat dinner every night we would go to mass, or he would just sit in the pew. And I can remember looking at my dad and saying, why aren't you going to communion with us? Because at that point in time, I don't think I fully understood that you had to be Catholic in order to receive communion. And so then my dad started asking all these questions, and, my mom wasn't necessarily lukewarm. She was the one who made sure we were at CCD every weekend. But my mom's faith and my dad's faith are completely different. My mom's faith, it's there and it's very strong, but she may not talk about it as much. Whereas my dad, on the other hand, is where I get my extrovertedness from. And he'll tell you his opinion no matter what the situation is. And so it was just always spoken with my dad, whereas with my mom, it was always the routine aspect. Like, we're going to mass, we're going to CCD, you're not missing CCD, you're going to youth group. Like, there's no questions asked. You're going to San Antonio with these people you don't know on a mission trip because it's good for you. And so, like, I think that is the difference between it. Is my mom's explanation was always, it's good for you. Whereas my dad's explanation was more of a personal, opinion of what it is he believed.
Okay. That makes sense. So I want to talk a little bit about this duality, or this two-faced
chameleon,
whatever you want to call it.
I don't know who came up with that idea, that word or phrase.
Some crazy person, I'm sure.
Who created a podcast that is nothing about talking about faith.
If you haven't discovered, Matt's talking about me. I may or may not have been the person who first coined him as a chameleon. It seems like, from a very early age, you talk about having this, you talk about being two-faced or living two lives. And it seems like that was almost like a theme throughout your life. You know, you had Baptist and Catholic,
sports and
a
band.
wealthier side of the family, a poorer side of the family. Sports, band, just kind of all over the place in interests.
Mm-hmm.
So like it seems like there was always this kind of dualness in your life. And it seemed like that continued to follow you. So, you know, even after you had this experience your junior year in your room, you talked about continuing to struggle with that up and into college. Can you just speak a little bit about what that journey was like?
There was always this fear that both these lives would mesh and eventually come together. And so like there was this constant fear of, oh no, the sports people are going to find out that I'm friends with band people, or vice versa. Or, oh no, they're going to find out that I live in this split household. And even though my parents are married, like there's something wrong with me, because not everyone in my household is Catholic, or not everyone in my household is baptism. And so like, I think when the duality finally came to it's okay was, I guess, in college, because you always ran into different people. And if you're not familiar with the Newman Center at Western, like they're everywhere. Like you would run into them in class, or you would run into them in, at the dining hall or in your dorm. And to see them live, I guess the journey was always, oh my gosh, I'm Catholic and I can't have other friends, or I'm Catholic and I have to be holier than thou, or I have to have this piety with me my entire life, because, you know, the only people that lived their faith were Jesus freaks. And so, when I was able to join into the community at the Newman Center and see that all these people have their own struggles, and, you know, there's this sense of openness at the Newman Center with faith that I never had before, whether it was Mary or Father Mike, you know, they were never afraid of my questions. They were never afraid to also hit me in the gut when I needed a gut punch, or call things out in me. Like one of the silliest things that I got called out for is when it was time to pray, I always covered my mouth, and it was always, Lord God, or whatever, you know, give us this opportunity to be together as friends. And it was one of those things that, like, I didn't even realize that that's what I was doing. And so I think the Newman Center was the first time that I saw Catholics that were able to grow, but also not able to lose themselves in their faith. And, you know, there are people who are more pious with their faith, and there are more people that have more reverence. But I was also seeing people who didn't have reverence, or, you know, and you could tell that they were reverent at Mass, and, you know, then they were themselves. And so being able to realize that there was a difference in these. There are times where we need to be more reverent in our faith, and there are times where we can be more relaxed. And I never really saw that until college. I think that was where the journey kind of came to a halt, as far as this duality of, you know, this is always a part of me, and it's a beautiful part of me, but it doesn't have to be holier than thou. And I think that growing up in Henderson, you know, that's what the outside world thinks of Catholics is they, you know, they're the rich ones. They're the stuck up ones. They're the more holier than thou ones. And this was the first time that I was around multiple people that wasn't their view of Catholics. And even in the groups that I hung out with that weren't Catholic, like there wasn't this, oh, the Catholics are holier than thou. And so if this was my experience growing up, why would I want to be a part of that? Like, why would that be something that I want to admit? But when I got to college, you were around people that wasn't the case. And so it was, oh, this ain't that bad. Like this is something that can be a part of me, but not be me.
So it sounds like you had this view, or thought that there was this view of Catholics where they had to act a certain way, look a certain way, be a certain way, and that didn't mesh with you.
Yeah.
And what you knew to be true about yourself. Like, Catholics can be serious and reverent at Mass and still be funny.
Yes, absolutely. And you would think with my youth minister growing up that that wouldn't be a struggle. But it was, because that wasn't what you saw at school.
Right.
The
you
Catholics
can take your faith seriously and still like sports or be interested in things other than Jesus. Like, yes, Jesus is number one and important in my life, but I can have hobbies and interests outside of the Catholic Church.
And I don't have to look a certain way. I don't have to be in a polo. I don't have to be the best dressed.
You mean you can show up in jeans and a t-shirt and Jesus still loves you?
Exactly.
Yes.
And so that was kind of my experience. And so when I got to college and I was around one of my best friends in Scott, and he also doesn't like sleeves on his shirts. And it was like, oh, okay, well, this is okay. Or, I was around other people who were super interested in professional sports, but they watched it at the Newman Center. Like, they didn't go to bars. They didn't go to restaurants. They didn't go to dorm rooms. Like, they popped up the Super Bowl in the Newman Center, and it's like they'd have a wee bowling tournament and they would all come together, or ping pong matches. And I think that was the first time that it clicked that, okay, my faith is a part of me. And so I can either show it to be a part of me, or I can continue to hide it. And I think in college, it was the first time that, like, I've tried hiding this for 18 years. Like, you can't hide it. Like, it comes out some sort of way. So I can either accept it and try to be that light for others, or I can continue to be miserable. Because I would say that's what I was. I was miserable. I was always in fear of whatever group I was around, that the other group is going to come together and they're going to be like, oh, hey, Matt, well, how do you know them? And it's so stupid, because so many people knew each other in Henderson. Like, so why would I just think that this wasn't going to happen or have this fear?
It sounds like you really came to understand that, and I think this is something that we could all learn, maybe need to hear, is that everybody's different.
Yes.
And that's okay. And that some people are going to be very serious and very somber when it comes to their faith, and other people are going to be shouting amen in the background.
Or making funny faces at little kids.
And anything in between. And that is wonderful. And it just shows the wide variety of people and personalities
and
that God created.
I think that's where I've loved my faith as an adult, is being able to show that, yes, I know that I can be reverent, and I know that the Eucharist and the Eucharistic prayer is where I need to be serious, but I'm going to do anything to make someone smile. And you can see other people like that within the congregation, and realizing that, faith does have multiple journeys. And that's what I've loved about this podcast in general, is hearing everyone's multiple journeys to get where they are. But ultimately, the biggest thing is they get to fall in love with Christ. And it's just crazy how, Christ can be so many different things for so many different people, but yet he can be exactly what I need as well.
If it's okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about your grandmother.
Yes, if I don't cry.
And if you do, that's absolutely okay. So first of all, I love this story. You said that she would watch Sports Center so that she would have something to talk with you about when you got there. That's so sweet.
Yes.
And it just shows the love that your grandmother had for you. It sounds like she was, you talk about her being a very big part of your faith journey. Can you just talk a little bit about how she helped to instill faith in your life?
Yes. The biggest thing that my grandma instilled on me, because I grew up in two faiths and, going to public school all this time, Catholics don't get a good rep. And I really struggled with that of, here we are having this faith that doesn't get a good rep. How can we continue to have this faith? And the reason why my grandma played such a big role is because she was the one I could go to with any question. And she would tell me what the church believed, and I could look at her and say, that's dumb. Like, that's silly. This isn't even taking into consideration X, Y, and Z. Or how could this still be when the world is changing around us? And my grandma would hear me out, and every now and then she would rebuttal. But every time it always ended with, that's the beauty of faith. Faith is asking these questions, finding the truth. It's okay to disagree with the truth. However, are you praying to understand the truth? And that's where faith comes in, is your faith is the struggle and the journey to understand the fullness of truth. And it always ended with that. And we would get done and my grandma would be like, well, how about you pray about it? Ask what God thinks. And almost every time, I go, and what sense of prayer I had, that's what would come back, is God would say, it's okay, but I'm right and you're wrong. Let's come to understand this faith teaching. And it's not going to be easy. You're going to have people in your life that come out well against it. And you're going to have family members, but we'll get there. And however long it takes you, however long the journey is, in the end, you'll come to understand that I love you, and this is why we believe what we believe.
That's such a beautiful sentiment. Part of my own journey is that of having lots of questions and not understanding what it is, what the church teaches, and asking those questions and having somebody who loved me enough to give me the answers and say, it's okay to ask questions, but you have to continue to seek understanding, especially if you don't agree.
Yeah.
And like you, it took me a while, but through prayer, through constant research and looking into and really discovering what the church teaches, because I think a lot of times we think we know what the church teaches, but I remember being 16, 17, asking questions, and the things that I thought the church taught were not what the church taught.
Yeah.
It was my perception or the things that I'd heard. And when I really started to look at what the church taught and why, it started to make so much more sense.
Yeah. And I think that's that is the beautiful thing that my grandma instilled in me was, and I think that's why that struggle that junior year was so strong, because the one person that told me it was okay is no longer here. And so now who's going to tell me it's okay? Well, God's going to tell me it's okay. And so it was just, and my grandma was always someone that knew the right thing to say, even if it wasn't the right thing to say. Like, she would always look at me and you would think she's going to tell you to suck it up, buttercup, or pray through it. And she'd be like, yeah, no, that sucks. And you're like, oh yeah, you're right. This does suck. Like, what's going on? Or there would be times that you go in there and my grandma would look at me and say, Matt, stop being a baby. You're going to get through it. Like, stop whining about it. And so I think that was what my grandma instilled in me in faith, is this whole concept of no matter what it is, it's going to be okay as long as we have God in it.
So something else that it sounds like was pretty influential for you in your faith life was your youth ministry program.
Yes.
And your youth minister.
Yes. Charlie was a huge influence in my life, and he didn't know it at the time, but especially in high school.
So can you just tell us walk us through what it was like being a part of that program and kind of the impact that it did have on you?
Yes. So the things that I loved about the program was just how much of a difference there was. In Henderson, it's a very unique community in that we only have one Catholic church. And so it was kind of my first witness, even though I didn't realize it in high school. Looking back on my faith journey, it was the first time that once I push all the emotions, all the feelings of being a kid out of the way, it was the first time that I was introduced to this concept of faith can look different for so many different people. Because you had kids from Owensboro Catholic, you had kids from Evansville Memorial, you had kids from Henderson County High School, you had kids that showed up that were into sports, you had kids that showed up that were into band, you had kids that showed up that were into cheerleading, that were into techie stuff, that were into their faith, that were into, you name it. There was someone in the program that had some sort of interest that was different. Even though I didn't come to realize that until college, I can look back and say, okay, so like that was the first time it was introduced. My eyes just weren't open to see it. And the same way that we had all these different things, we were so mission and service oriented. I don't remember camp being publicized, even though it was. I don't remember it because all we really cared about were the mission trips. Like, where are we going? Where are we going to serve? Who are we going to help? Those opportunities were also introductions into how faith can live out in so many different ways. Like Sister Darlene, how she can be in the community that she was in Caruthersville and not lose who she is as an individual. And, we would go out to San Antonio and, we'd be in a church with bars over the windows, and everyone in that place was in love with Christ, even though it didn't look like it from the outside. Or we would go to Flagstaff, Arizona, and you would see genuine people living out their faith in service, and those who didn't have everything that you may think you need, they were still in love with Christ. And so it was a constant reminder of the introductions I had as a kid of faith can look like different for so many different people. And I think I shared a lot of the similar interests. Charlie was super into music. Every time we would show up to youth group, there'd be a new song or a new CD or some sort of music. And
you're showing your age with CDs there.
I know, right? Golly. But you would be listening to it, and he never played anything that wasn't Christian. And you're like, this is Christian music? Like, this doesn't sound like Jesus Loves Me. Like, or this doesn't sound like Kumbaya, My Lord, or later on Matt Maher. But, oh, wow, so he has this same interest, and there are music out there that can draw us closer to Christ. You just have to know where to find it. And so...
And it doesn't have to be the guitar picking Kumbaya.
Yes, yeah, It doesn't have to be around the campfire. It can be Red and hardcore rock, and it can be Skillet, and it could be Thousand Foot Crutch, like all these different things that are out there.
These are all Christian rock bands.
Rock bands. Same thing with Sanctus Real. Before Legacy, they were more of an alternative rock. Being introduced to all these different things is what really made my faith alive. And it could all go back to the introduction that Charlie gave. Like, it was always these things. And, even though it wasn't very vocal till my senior year, I wanted to do what he did. How can you have all these different people in the room, all these different interests, all these different cliques, all these different clubs, all these different things, and still be able to show Christ to every single one of them? And so it was just phenomenal. And, I wish that everyone could have that same experience, but it was just something to be seen. It was a witness to have 40, 50, 80 people, if it was a fun night and messy games, and everything be centered around Christ.
You talk about mission and service, and that's something that's continued to follow you. I mean, that's something that's very important in your own ministry.
Yes.
Now that you are a youth minister at a parish here in Owensboro.
Yes. I guess I want to give people the same opportunities that I had, being able to love Christ the same way that Charlie showed love of Christ to me. And so, yeah, all the things are very, very instrumental, because if it weren't for all these things, I don't know if I would have had that moment my junior year in my room of, okay, God reaching out to me. And so if I do all of these things because all these things are what led me to that relationship, then I want to give these things to others as well.
Isn't it amazing looking back too, of being able to connect all these dots of things you didn't realize were important at the time or in the moment, but reflecting back on them later, seeing, wow, this was a huge moment for me.
Yeah. And for me, I want to beat my head up against the wall, because I mean, even right now, like, this was the first time that I was able to connect that everything in youth group was an introduction. Like, why did it take me to college to realize that faith can look like so many different things for so many people when I had everything in front of me as a high schooler? And so
I'm going to remind you of something you said at the beginning, that faith is a journey.
Yes.
We often think that it happens like that, like I have this encounter moment and the next day I'm perfect and whatever. But most people I talk to, they have this encounter and it takes months, weeks, years sometimes for them to fully accept, turn the tables. Heck, I've got stuff I've been working on for like 15 years. It's a journey, so you're in good company. So I guess I just have one last question for you. You talked about this duality and how it followed you through most of your life, but you've been able to incorporate it into your personality, been able to integrate it into part of who you are. Do you ever feel like you're slipping back into those old ways? And what do you do to recenter yourself when that happens?
Yeah, I do feel like I'm slipping back into those old ways. But luckily, I have an amazing wife, and she is real quick to put me in my place in a very loving way. If you know my wife, she doesn't have a mean bone in her body. But I think that's the thing that has been drawing back, is that my wife can look at me when I am having those struggles and say, "Matt, I haven't seen you pray in a really long time." Even if my wife says and I don't hear it, I've got you and Chrissy and Charlie and Christina and Nick and all the other youth ministers to be like, "Matt, when was the last time you prayed? When was the last time that you centered yourself?" And, I've got my men's group. They do the same thing. And so I think what I've noticed in my life is that I've got to have people around me that are willing to punch me in the gut and say, "Matt, suck it up. The one thing you haven't done, go do it." And
so having a community around you to hold you accountable.
Yeah. And
tell you the hard things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like really the times in which I really feel the struggle is when, I'm reconnecting with people from the past and realizing, I have all these emotions coming up with me of, anger, sadness. And then I go and I can go to you guys, or I can go to my men's group, or I can go to my wife and share those. And they can look at me and say, "That's not of God." I think that's what pulls me back in, because every time that I feel like I'm slipping, I can tell that my prayer life is slipping. But I need people to look at me and say, "Matt, your prayer life is slipping." And then I go back into prayer, and then, I'm able to use that chameleon like gift of being able to connect with many people and use it for good. And that's where I realize that it is a gift, because it does help me in my ministry. Like, I can connect with so many different kids. Like, I laugh all the time because some of my high schoolers think it is completely ridiculous that I watch The Bachelor and The Bachelorette. And like, I love it because I love drama. And the look on their face of like, "I can't believe you do that." But then being able to look across the room and see other people like giddy because they want to talk about it, and they want to be able to talk about the latest episode or what's going on in so-and-so's life. And so I think it really helps me in my ministry. And when I feel myself slipping, it always comes back to prayer. Like, where is prayer in my life? Where is the sense of community that's holding me accountable?
Thank you so much, Matt, for joining us here today, and for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. It was a blessing and a joy.
And thank you all for listening here today. If you are interested in hearing more stories of finding faith and encountering, tune in next week for our next guest. If you have any questions, need someone to journey with, or would be interested in sharing your story, please contact me at findingfaith123@gmail.com.